Today on the Hobby Bench, I'll be painting up the vision for Marvel Crisis Protocol. So I've got the vision here, and I've gone ahead and, as I typically do with contrast paints, use a gray primer, dry brush it white, and try to figure out maybe how I'm going to work with it. And originally I thought I'd paint the classic yellow cowl and green, and I really thought that would probably be a good look for him. But looking at the costume now, I realize maybe it's even more of a modern iteration, and looks like I think I might use some different offsets of greens and reds. And to be honest with you, I've got a lot of X-Men in the pipe. I figure I'll probably be tired of painting up yellow, so I want to try to do a different color scheme with him. So looking at him, I decided to go ahead and try using the Vallejo Orc Skin contrast paint. And this will be like laying down the cowl and for his cape, and also some of his armor pads. Now, as I mentioned before, a lot of times when I talk with contrast paints, you just want to try to go a nice even coat and paint through one section at a time as much as you can. Now, it's a little bit of a challenge here because it's such a large cape and there's so much surface area to go through. But I'm just carefully going along as I can, trying to watch out the edges. Now, this is a lighter color, fortunately, so, if I bleed it over to another section or something like that, that shouldn't be too much of a problem to fix up. But I'm just going to do some nice even strokes as much as I can. And this is undilute. And just trying to go through most of the model here and just let the contrast paint sort of do its own thing. You can see here now, I'm just working a bit more on the cowl and just trying to be very careful, trying to look at the other areas and just try to give an even coat. And here you go. I've got the cape down. I've highlighted out different sections of his armor with that color. So I'm going to paint the rest of this green now, and I'm going to be using Troll Green. And frankly, I think it leaves a lovely emerald look. A lovely emerald color for this. And so again, just like the other contrast paint that I'm using, just trying to do an even coat and just go through one section at a time. Now, fortunately, these Vallejo paints, they're a little bit forgiving, honestly, in using that. So it takes a little while to dry. So you can usually get back there, maybe working a little bit of water onto that contrast paint. You can rework some areas, but in general, you just want to try to work one section as you can and try to avoid going through it too much. Now, this is a little bit of a challenge in the back of this. I realized maybe if I had done this over again, I might have painted some stuff up before assembling him, because it was really sort of hard with that cape. It's really a bit of a tight section there to try to get out and paint those. But, I think if you can take your time and be patient about it, you can go ahead and get that worked in. So I've got those bases down and it's looking pretty good so far. So now I'm going to be working on the reds. And I think for this one, I was sort of questioning what to use. And so in this case here, I'm going to go ahead and work with Seraph Red. This is one of the more intense contrast paints. I wasn't too sure how it's going to look. I want to try to carefully go in there to the face. And again, using this undilute, and I got to say, as it was getting on there, I could just see it's this lovely, lovely deep red. Looks gorgeous. And I think it just matches quite well with the way I think I sort of envision in my head the way the vision would look. So I'm just carefully working through here, and basically his face and a lot of the other exposed sections in his chest and his arm. I'm just going ahead and use this contrast paint. It covers pretty well, and just trying to work in there. And at this point here, you just want to try to be careful, trying not to get it to bleed over too much into other areas. And you can try to touch this up somewhat, but it's getting a little bit harder, working with some of those greens and getting over that. And give a little bit of a different angle here. You can just see I'm just carefully going along the edge there and along his arm, just trying to let the tip of the brush do its work. And just be careful with this and just give a nice even coat as much as possible. And just working on through that arm. I think it looks real good. So there you go. Now for his gem, his Infinity Gemstone, I used two different colors for that one. I initially started out with a base of dark sand, and then I used deep yellow. So the dark sand gives a good base because even though working with these yellows, they can be a little transparent. So laying that down first and then working on covering it up with a deep yellow just allows that yellow to stand out and work very well. So now I'm going to be working on his cape a little bit more. I'm going to be using more of a traditional Vallejo color. I'm using lime green for that. And the key here for this is what I really want to try doing is highlighting the edge of the cape, trying to get those upper folds, make those stand out a little bit more. And so I'm just carefully going along the edge here in these raised areas with this lime green. It matches pretty well with the Orc Skin contrast paint. It's a tad more of a lighter shade, and I think it just brings out that highlight just a bit more. So carefully going through this here on these edges and stuff, and just trying to add just a small amount of depth to this. Now, it's harder, I think, working with, let's say, these folds of cloth and that such with these contrast paints. In the interiors, it can work out pretty well in these deeper recesses, but for these raised bits, it's just sort of hard to bring out that texture. And so you can see here more on the edge. This is what I'm going to slowly work on, is blend this in, and this is thinned out a bit now, is just use that lime green as a lighter color to bring out the upper folds of the cloak, and just try to leave the darker areas there, areas with a little bit more of a recess, the original color of the contrast paint. I'm going to slowly work this color in here, and if you need to, probably try to thin that out a little bit more and just add just a small amount of depth to that you wouldn't necessarily get just with the contrast alone. Here I'm working on the edge of the cowl. Again, this is areas that catch a little bit more light. That's when I want to try to use this paint to pick that up, those upper colors. I'm also doing the same thing for the armor pads, but I'm just going to work on the cape pretty much and work this color in there, the areas I think I get more light. And that's what I've got so far. It's looking pretty good. Like the way it is. Now, for this, I'm going to try doing a little bit of a blend between military green and using lime green. I was using an intermediate color, but I just didn't quite like the way it looks. So I'm using those two to add a small amount of highlight to the main sections of his body. Now, unfortunately, I just don't have a good emerald color, which I think this troll green as a contrast paint is great. For here, I'm just trying to work out some more of a highlight. So I'm just trying to get the areas I think that sort of catch the light somewhat. It's a slightly brighter color of green. And that's what I'm just going to go through his areas on his arm, a little bit more of his definition of that, on his fingers, on his hand, also on the top of his skull, and just work that in there. You can see here I'm just working a little bit more on his wrist and on his hand, and just trying to get the areas I think that are going to capture some of that light with that lighter shade, and slowly work that in there. That's adding some more depth to that. I think that green just stands out a bit more. In this case here, I want to make it just pop just a tad more. So now I'm going to be using that same color, and actually I'm going to be mixing in some deep yellow just to try to bring that out some more. And the idea then is just to go back to the areas I have. And this one is just a little bit less intense if I can on some certain areas. I'm not going to go over too much of these areas as much as I can. I just want to, again, pick out the areas I think that would really catch the light. And this is a little bit of a challenge because it doesn't really have defined sections of that muscle. Let's say I might have with Iron Fist. So for this, it's a tad subtle, just slowly working with this. A bit more on the head there. You can see that's definitely some areas I think that would capture light. So we're sort of blending that in. As I mentioned, it's hard on this because it doesn't quite have these cut sections of muscles that you sort of have. It's a much more subtle transition between these other raised areas. So it's a bit difficult to work with, but I'm just trying to get the areas I think that would capture this light. So I've got that there and it's looking pretty good. Frankly, I've got to say, I think the red looks fine as it is. I thought about going back there and touching it up, but I'm going to have to stick with that. Now, I'm going to be going ahead and using Hospitallier Black for the brick wall here. I'm just going to give it a dark, intense shading with that. And that's what you can see right there. I've just brought out all those cracks and painted out the wall itself. Now, one thing I wanted to go is, now that I had it, I was looking through it and I realized, I had these mixes of these two colors as a highlight and they stood out quite a bit, but I think it's almost too much. And I'm not too sure, really the way it looks. So I thought about going ahead and going back then and giving it another coat of troll green. But this time I'm going to be using the medium and I'm going to basically thin out the color quite a bit, almost make it like a glaze. And so this is a very thin, transparent coat that I'm going over that. And the idea there, I think I just want to try to blend in those highlights just a tad more by just giving it another coat of that contrast. And so this is thin enough to allow those colors to bleed through, but it's going to soften the transition a bit more. Once it dried up, and you can sort of see there in the skull, it looks okay, but it's just a bit much. I'm going to go ahead and go through with this contrast paint that's been thinned out with the contrast medium. And I think that will give me what I want in the look on this. And so you got to just be very careful here. It is thinned out, and that's good with that, but it flows pretty well. But I just want to try to make sure at this point here, I'm not getting it into areas that I painted before. That looks much better. And you can sort of see that finer definition of his muscles and stuff like that. That transition I've got, it's blended in a bit more. Same thing for his skull. I think it looks pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'm going to be working more on the wall of the base here. In this case here, I'm using a makeup brush and just a regular craft paint. And the idea is, just like with dry brushing, just try to get off most of the excess. I'm going to just gently apply this here with some gentle brush strokes and tapping to just impart some pigment on the other areas there. And I'm just trying to be very gentle and not push down too much. You want to leave that deep recesses of that black in there and just touch up as much as I can. Now there's going to be some areas I'm not going to be able to get into, and I'll go back to those later using more of a traditional dry brush. But if you've got a large surface area and you need to get that covered pretty well, you can always just take out a large makeup brush and work with that, but these work pretty good too. I'm just going to sort of dapple on that color and give that a good base color. Now I'm going to be using a filbert brush that I've basically beat the hell. And I'll be going back and doing that as a dry brush for these areas that are really close to his leg and stuff and the inside of his cape where I can't get that makeup sponge into. Now here I want to say is that when you're doing this, you want to make sure you're doing these strokes that are away from your model. The idea is that if you get any flecks or anything like that, that sort of fly off, it's not going to be getting onto the miniature that you painted and rather just be going off on your workbench there. And so I'm just gently working through the areas and just giving that a good coat, a good dry brush. Already, I think it's getting a nice look there. So now I'm going to go back again. I just want to bring out some more highlight. And this time I'm going to be using a brush. It's going to be a lighter gray of craft paint. And here I'm just going over a bit more of the edges, a bit more of the wall face there, and just touching that up just to add a small amount of depth to that. And I'm not even too sure maybe with the rubble in front if I'm going to work with that. I'll probably just touch it up somewhat. But here you're just going to go through and get the surface of that and just layering of color. It's a very simple technique to do, and I think it looks pretty darn good. And there you go. Vision is done. I like the way it looks, especially, oh God, that Seraph Red is just gorgeous. It's just a deep red color. Looks wonderful, I think, for the vision. And I have to say, the highlights, the greens were good, but just that last thin coat of troll green diluted out with the contrast medium, I think was just the look it needed. So I'm pretty happy the way it turned out. And not too hard working with it. I have to say the challenge in the miniature maybe is it doesn't really have a lot of defined sections. So there's a lot of areas that sort of blend in with each other. It's a little bit harder to work with in that case there. But for the most part, I'm really happy the way it looks. I think it's pretty much going to be my Avengers team pretty close to finishing it up. Can't wait to get him on the tabletop.